Hey, podcast listeners. Here's the second part of our Urban Bee episode. Hope you enjoy it.
Now I'm recording. Okay.
Yeah, so the first time,
name, by the
my
way?
name is Doug Sponsler. I'm a postdoc at Penn State University in the Department of Entomology. I work with Christina Grosinger in the Center for Pollinator Research. And here we are in Old City, Philadelphia.
Okay.
And we are about to do something that I don't think very many people had the opportunity to do. We're going to walk up through 4 stories of a working chocolate factory. We are going to emerge onto the rooftop and then do some beekeeping.
How did you end up doing a bee study in Philadelphia?
Well, so I grew up in Philadelphia, and I have always wanted to be an entomologist, and have been pursuing that goal for pretty much my whole life since I was a very small child. I did my PhD at Ohio State and got into bees there, but what I always wanted to do was to come back and study plants and insects in the place that I grew up and fell in love with nature, which is here in Philadelphia. And it's really the theoretical content behind this project that motivates me is the idea of urban ecology and how to understand the relationship between human land use in cities and the plants and animals that can coexist in cities. And I think that studying plants and pollinators gives you a really broad kind of swath of the ecological relationships in a city that connects across trophic levels, and it connects across plants and animals, and it connects with people in a really special way too. People tend to like bees, and so it's more accessible to the public. And also the beekeeping community is a fantastic group of people to work with. They have a vested interest in plant-pollinator interactions, and they have a lot of expert local knowledge on the topic. So
The urban ecology of green bottle flies doesn't get people quite as excited.
it doesn't, no.
I mentioned that slightly tongue-in-cheek because I see them working my milkweed flowers in front of my house all the time.
Yeah, no.
But it's like you mentioned flies to anybody in the city, and they're like, oh no. I mean, you might as well be doing studies on.
But it's true,
like,
though, that flies are very much the neglected pollinator guild. And there's a whole group of just just take the syrphid family of flies that are very important pollinators, very diverse, and
which end up gobbling up aphids on my...
Yeah, as larvae. They're great predators.
milkweed,
Right, but people will talk about bats as pollinators before flies.
Yeah,
like
monkeys
they're
as pollinators before flies.
yeah, like I mean, it's just like like flies. It's like oh no.
They're actually quite attractive too, I think, especially the syrphids.
The green bottle ones, you stop and look at them, they're really pretty animals. Before I forget, what's your name?
Don Shump.
How would you describe your title for this stuff?
So I am the owner of the Philadelphia Bee Company.
Okay. What's the Philadelphia Bee Company?
So the Philadelphia Bee Company is a urban apiary operation where we we're sort of split into 3 separate companies. We do educational outreach, so I'll do speaking engagements. I speak at the flower show every year. I do school assemblies, anything from toddler up to, very old folks.
Sure.
And then we do seasonal regional varietal honeys. So depending on what time of year and what part of the city, you get a different type of honey. Varietal honeys in the traditional sense are usually associated with floral varietal honeys. And so in the city, we don't have any
like
more.
buckwheat
Where a beekeeper would land, you see like an orange blossom or a clover. We don't have enough of one thing in bloom at a given time.
Okay.
So what we produce is a wildflower, but because we can break it down by season and region, you still get a beautiful gradient of color and taste in the honeys that we have here. And then we do removals. So we remove anything that flies and stings.
It's kind of tempting. You're walking right by us. Hi, how you doing? So right now we cut through the delicious smelling kitchen of Shane Confectionaries, and now we're walking up the staircase. Now we're walking up the steps to the roof.
So no more steps, just the ladder left.
Okay. Now we're cutting through what looks like their storeroom on the top floor and up a ladder.
A box full of honey frames can weigh about 75 pounds, so you can imagine what this
So the
is
beginning of the season and the end of the season are a bit of an ordeal.
Yes, that is absolutely the case.
And as heavy as a box full of honey is, a box full of bees is heavy enough and complicated for other reasons.
I imagine, yeah.
Given
Something
the
you
choice.
don't want to drop in the kitchen, you know?
No, logistically it can be a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah. So now we're gonna don some bee veils. Okay, so now we're up on the roof, which looks like a pretty typical, I call it a row house roof. So a tar roof with an air conditioning unit going and some flowers. So they got a couple beds and some flower pots. And we're looking at what in layman's terms I would call a few beehives.
That's the same thing I would call it.
That's exactly what in technical terms too.
So the point of our research
There
is
you
to characterize the relationships between plants and pollinating insects in Philadelphia, and specifically in the different places of Philadelphia, because Philly is such a complex city that really drives home this idea that the urban landscape is not some monolithic thing. It's extremely complex.
Yep.
And Philly is the epitome of that. It's an old city. It's a city of neighborhoods. And what we want to do is sample honeybee colonies and wild bee nests throughout the city, identify the plants that are used by the bees to produce the honey and pollen that we sample from them, and then try to connect those plant-pollinator relationships down to the level of land use at each of these sites to see if there are certain characteristic floral communities associated with different land use types, ultimately with the idea of being able to give concrete recommendations to people, say, trying to decide what kind of street tree to plant or how to repurpose a vacant lot. If as like the Green Philly initiative would suggest, conservation is an explicit management goal in urban planning in the city, then this is a practical endpoint that could be aimed at provisioning pollinators, and in general, managing for functional plant-pollinator relationships in the city.
Okay. All right, and so this is how Ken Frank was talking about what is it, Asian elm pollen showing
Yeah,
up in
so
the fall?
Chinese elm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was something we found last year that was quite a shock. And
Why was that a shock? So
So it was a shock to me because when I've spent a lot of time identifying pollen in various projects, and when I looked at the microscope slides that I made from the honey samples I collected last fall, I saw something that looked like elm pollen to me. And elm is a pretty distinctive looking pollen. So as soon as I saw it, elm was what came to mind, but it was in the fall. And normally you think of the big wind-pollinated trees like elm being spring-blooming trees.
yeah.
And wind-pollinated trees. So,
yeah.
so in both regards, it's unexpected to see it in the fall. But Ken Frank informed me that there was, in fact, a species of elm around here that blooms in the fall, which is unusual. It's the Chinese elm, Ulmus parviflora. And there's a lot of anecdotal reports about bees foraging on it, though, again, elm is supposedly a wind-pollinated plant, which you would not expect it to be producing nectar. It would have no motivation to do
Are
so.
they getting the nectar or just the pollen?
Well, this is the interesting story. So the pollen shows up in the honey, and it also shows up in the pollen traps, and you'll see the pollen traps here in a minute. So they are definitely going to it for pollen. However, the fact that it shows up in the honey is peculiar, because normally you'd associate that with nectar foraging, because pollen incidentally gets incorporated into nectar while the bees are foraging on it. But again, a priori, we wouldn't expect Chinese elm to be producing significant amounts of nectar. Now, we could be wrong. It could be a tree that does use insect pollination to a significant extent and does produce nectar for that reason. But the alternative hypothesis that I am particularly excited about, and I hope that we were able to find more evidence for it this year, is that
Time to test it.
So elm trees in general and urban street trees in particular are highly susceptible to phloem-feeding insect infestations, so scale insects, aphids,
Okay.
and those insects exude what's called honeydew, which is sugary stuff that comes out their rear end while they're eating, and honeybees will collect that just as happily as they will floral nectar.
These are aphids or such that are sucking sap kind of out of the tree.
Yes. It's just like
It's like aphid pee.
yeah, more or less.
Okay.
So we're turning aphid pee into bee vomit.
There you go.
Yeah, and selling it.
This is what we're putting in our toast.
It's a delicious tasting honey. But anyway, so it's possible that if there was a big aphid infestation, that the release of pollen would coincide with this aphid infestation. So the pollen would kind of fall into all these sticky aphids exuding their honeydew, and then the bees would come along and collect it. And the honey was a very dark honey, and honeydew honey tends to be dark. So there's circumstantial evidence supporting this honeydew hypothesis, but I won't
You've got to
be
combine
convinced.
that honey with that coffee that they get from civet poop.
Yeah.
Well, it is a delicious honey that Don and I sometimes refer to as the coffee porter honey, right?
Yes.
So this already has a little bit of a tannic kind of bitterness to it.
But it's
slightly,
not as bad as a buckwheat.
Yeah.
Like I think the buckwheat is is something that you traditionally think
I
of,
love
like
buckwheat honey, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's like if you're the kind of guy that's into like pot liquor, like you're dipping into the gravy at the bottom of the pot, and like that's the kind of thing that you'd really like.
Horoscope.
Yeah, right. but it's one of the honey here is probably the darkest honey that I've harvested ever.
Here meaning Philly or
no,
here on this roof?
on this roof.
Okay.
So we had a honey, and I was really only able to isolate maybe like 12 pounds of it down to the pure dark. I mean, light went to die in this honey. Like it was just like motor oil, but it was absolutely delicious.
So the way I'm identifying the source of the honey is I'm taking the honey and diluting it and then centrifuging it, and that pulls all the suspended pollen out of it into nice little pellets. And then there are two things that I'm doing. I'm making microscope slides for like a quick survey of what's there, but I'm using, my main method is DNA barcoding. So I'm extracting DNA, amplifying it, sequencing it. And so especially if the microscopy and the barcoding corroborate each other on this Chinese elm determination, then I'll be very confident that it's Chinese elm pollen. I'm already pretty confident of that. Yes, this is one of the places we found quite a lot of it. Though in general, the Center City hives were characterized by this dark honey associated with Chinese elm pollen. But,
and more importantly, it played into the seemingly health and weight of the colonies.
Yeah. So check this out.
Okay.
This under here is not the normal part of the hive. This is a data logging hive scale.
Okay, it looks like a little block underneath the hive.
Yeah, so it's about the size of a 2x4, but it has 2 load cells on it. It's made by a company called Broodminder. This thing will log weights every hour. And so over the course of the summer, we get thousands of weight readings, and we get a very high-resolution trace of the weight dynamics of this colony. So then what we see, for example, is last year, all of our colonies lost weight in August, because apparently that's not a good time for flowers in Philly.
Okay.
But some of the colonies got this kind of little rescue nectar flow in September, where they started gaining weight again right at the end. And that was when we saw the Chinese elm pollen and the dark honey associated with the Chinese elm pollen.
Okay.
And it was specifically those colonies that had the dark honey with the Chinese elm pollen, the putative Chinese elm pollen, that had that weight bump. So we think that was the late season nectar flow that was pulling those colonies out of a slump.
All right, so right now they're loading up the smoker with looks like pine straw.
Yeah, they did pine needles.
And I should mention, throughout there's what looks to me like a good crowd of bees flying about. So Don is prying the top off of the top box of one of the hives. We're opening it up. You see inside all the frames. Gives a puff of smoke. Pulls out a frame. Recording where there are eggs and...
Have you ever seen bee eggs?
Not up close.
So right, those little white dots down at the bottom of those cells.
Which cells? Of the ones that seem to have other stuff in them?
Yeah. So right in like these cells, you'll see like looks like a little grain of rice.
Yes, I do. Okay, great.
All right, that's a bee egg.
Thank you.
So that's what when we're going into the colonies, that's what we're looking for. That tells us that the queen's been here within 3 days.
Okay.
Okay, because an egg is only an egg for 3 days.
And then it develops, and then they seal it up more.
It develops into a larva, and then so if we see larva, then we know that the queen's been there, for more than about a week.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's 3, 6, and 12 is the timing. So it's 3 days as an egg, 6 days as a larva, 12 days as a pupa.
Okay. Cool. And does everything sort of get stuck together with wax?
No, it gets stuck together with propolis.
Propolis. Say that word again.
Propolis. So bees, it's bee glue. So bees will go out and they'll collect, in addition to collecting honey and pollen, they'll collect resins from plants to make glue. and this is how they make it has antibiotic properties.
Okay.
So this is,
So
if you
keeps
feel
things-
it almost feels like a Play-Doh, and it's not like super sticky. But
Yeah.
if you put that between two pieces of wood, I mean, I'm 6'2", 300 pounds and an ex-offensive lineman. I can lift a hell of a lot,
Yeah.
but I can't pull hives apart
Okay.
because they glue them together with this stuff, and it's possible. I mean, you saw me trying to get this lid off.
Yeah.
Well, that's because they propolised it down,
Okay.
and they propolised this to the top box,
Okay.
the inner cover to the top, to the outer cover.
Got it.
And so when trying to get that off, I had to break the propolis seal, and that's why we carry around mini pry bars.
Yeah.
You know, these hive tools are what allow us to get the boxes apart and the frames apart.
Got it. Thank you.
When you first get into beekeeping, the first hive you lose it's Heartbreak Ridge.
Yeah.
Like, you know, especially when you lose a colony over winter and the bees are frozen in the last
Ah.
jobs that they were doing. You'll see these like two workers that are feeding each other, and they'll be doing that for
It's like the
eternity.
bee Pompeii. You know?
Yeah,
Like,
that's
oh
exactly
no,
what I was thinking,
it's like losing a pet. Like
Yeah.
you get really upset. Like, you know, I remember that, you know, my first year out, and I'm like, you know, I'm a grown man. Like, you know,
Yeah.
getting all misty eyed. You know, God, with the number of hives we lose anymore, it's just like you gotta distance yourself a little bit.
What's your, let's say, annual loss rate for a hive?
For us, it's like, you know, we're around 40%. Like,
Okay.
you know, this year was higher, and you know, and that's one because we got.
It's got a really cold winter.
It was a bad winter, and we got crushed with removal work last season. And so it's one of those where it's like, a lot of beekeepers will say, you know, oh, you know, if you have big losses, it's because of mismanagement. And it was like, you know, oh, I'd say absolutely. Like last year, we got busy on the removal side, and we didn't, you know, didn't keep sharp enough track of our mite counts, and we had a higher loss than usual.
Okay.
But in terms of Pennsylvania, like we have lots of people that are saying that they lost close to 50% this year. I
Yeah.
don't know exactly what the numbers are, but
What would you consider a good year's loss rate to be?
if it's under 20%, that's awesome.
Okay.
I mean, 18% is what is generally considered sustainable long-term losses,
Okay.
but
So 40% means you have to be importing queens from elsewhere to
queen,
replace-
no, you got to buy whole
or
hives.
whole hives. I'm sorry. Okay.
So you know, like this, like, you know, so I bought over 40 nukes,
Okay.
nucleus colonies this spring to sort of kick us back off again.
Okay.
And you know, but you're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars.
So these are hives that are produced elsewhere in the country where they're doing better.
Yeah.
and trucked
So,
in. Okay.
well, that you can produce bees earlier.
Ah.
So Georgia, California, you know, Florida, and then they get shipped up here, which is part of the problem with the losses, because you're getting queens that are genetically more adapted to warmer climes.
Presumably, you're also moving pathogens around.
Oh yeah.
Parasites around also.
Oh no, if you wanted to model how to best spread disease, beekeeping is what you would use.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, just the almond crop alone, we're shipping 1.7 million colonies to 850,000 acres of almonds. So
Yeah.
we're taking 58% of all, there's 2.6 million colonies of bees in the United States. So we're taking 58% of one species, putting it
all in one place.
all in one place,
And then
letting
moving it
everybody
back out.
commingle,
Yeah.
and then spreading it back out to where, and that's how we ended up with tracheal mites in the 80s. That's how we spread Varroa in the 90s,
Yeah.
and that's a big reason why we are where we are.
Yeah.
So,
On that happy note.
yeah, beautiful brood pattern on this, Doug.
When you say beautiful brood patterns, I'm
So,
looking at-
so you can see this capped brood here.
Yeah.
This is all pupating bees.
Okay.
And there's not a lot of holes. Okay, so that's a good sign. She's laying the eggs tight. The eggs are, broadly speaking, surviving to become mature pupa.
Okay.
And so the more you see of that, the better.
Okay.
All right. If this had more holes in it, like if it looked like someone took a shotgun to it,
Yeah.
then that would be a bad sign. It means the larva or the eggs are dying somewhere down the line. They're being eaten.
Clear it
They're
out.
being cannibalized for resources, and then
Yeah.
the queen has to relay eggs there.
Okay.
And that's a bad sign because they're putting these resources into producing larvae that are not going to survive and then have to start
It
over.
was a waste. Yep. But not so here.
Right, and you lose a lot of time with that. So, I mean, but this is like, that's really nice. You get this sort of horseshoe going.
So what we're looking for here is a frame that has a lot of uncapped honey or nectar on it. So when bees first collect the nectar, they bring it back the way it comes out of the plant, which is fairly watered down. They have to dry it down, and they mix it with some enzymes to break down the sugars. So they break down fructose into its glucose, or they break down sucrose into its glucose and fructose monomers. Anyway, when it's done, when it's fully dried down, it gets capped with wax. But we don't want to sample capped honey because we don't know when it's from. It could be from last year for all we know. Okay. But by sampling uncapped honey, we know that it's fairly recent.
Got it. And that's what you guys are looking for.
Yeah, so we're collecting on a monthly basis. So I want to collect a sample that reflects recent foraging for this period.
Okay. So right now, Doug is sort of using a large plastic test tube to sort of scrape the frame, and I guess to collect the honey that you're going to spin down later.
Doug, did you get the pollen sample for this one yet?
No, I didn't get any of the pollen samples yet.
Did anyone ever accidentally eat your samples?
Well, it's not unusual for us to like stop for a moment and eat some honey.
Okay.
Let's talk about the pollen traps over here. This is
the pollen traps are essentially forcing the bees through quarter-inch harbor cloth. All right, and what that does is that's just enough space for the bees to squeeze through, and because it's so tight, the bees when they carry the pollen on their legs and their pollen baskets. Well, that gets knocked off by the screens, and then we have a trap, a box underneath to catch it.
Got it.
So we force it. We basically make them go through this maze where they have to get back to their hive. They have to go through this wire, and that tends to knock off most of the pollen on them. And then we collect that in the boxes down underneath.
Got it.
So that's just from
I've been trying to think of the way to describe the size of those. They're like nerds. They can't.
Yeah, that's actually a really apt description.
Yep. That's what you should sell at Whole Foods.
They don't taste like nerds, but they actually do taste okay oftentimes.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I mean, they arguably taste better than nerds.
Yeah, my daughter's a big nerd fan at 6, but I think I've outgrown that.
Yeah. It's not really my forte.
All right, do you guys have more to check?
No, I think
we're done here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will just add that even though the emphasis right now at this stop is on honeybees, the picture of urban plant pollinator ecology necessarily involves the wild pollinator community, and even though it's a little harder to study, we are incorporating it this year. It's a complex conversation, kind of balancing the work with honeybees and work with wild pollinators, and in some cases this turns into a very polarized discussion about native versus non-native species and agriculture versus conservation. I don't think it needs to be that polarized, but
you're anticipating all my polarizing questions. So
okay. Well, I can save some of the discussion for those questions if you'd like.
That's fine.
But so it is of course true that the honeybee is an introduced agricultural species, but that doesn't for that reason mean that it is not participating ecologically in a system.
Right.
And moreover, it doesn't mean that it doesn't justify itself as part of the urban fauna, because I think it justifies itself in many ways, not just ecological, but the fact that we have something as beautiful as urban beekeeping on top of a chocolate factory in Old City, where we get a chance to talk to people about plant-pollinator interactions in a way that would not be possible.
And discover something about the plant community of the neighborhood. Yeah,
and we have a community of beekeepers in the city. That the community of beekeepers in the city is the most knowledgeable community in the city about plant-pollinator interactions. And if it were not for urban beekeeping, you would not have that community of expert knowledge that we have, as exemplified by Don.
All right, thanks, guys. Ready to head down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, podcast listeners. Hope you enjoyed all this great urban bee stuff. Please be in touch if you have any questions, comments at UrbWildlifeCast for Twitter, or on Gmail at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com, or find us on Facebook give us some ideas, your thoughts, feedback, etc. And many thanks to Doug Sponkler, Don Shump, Scott McIver, and Tim Hurd for a fabulous bee episode.
Apparently, looks like striped hyenas got loose out of the zoo in Erie, Pennsylvania, when a tree fell down on their enclosure.
Oh my God, I've actually been to Erie. I did some good herping there. Well, I hope everyone's okay. The striped hyenas aren't quite as scary as the spotted hyenas, correct?
I don't think so, but nothing is, I don't think, in the world.
So either way, so it's a high standard for wildlife you might not want loose in Erie. Although, hey, we had that great episode where we looked at spotted hyenas in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and they don't seem to bother too many people.
No.
So here's to coexistence.